The Alabama River doesn't hurry. It drifts slow, deliberate, like it knows what it's hiding. And on its quiet bend once stood Willow Creek Plantation, a house built on wealth, sorrow, and secrets that refused to stay buried. In the late 1840s, this land was everything the South prided itself on: rolling fields of cotton, neat white fences, and a mansion with pillars tall enough to touch God. The Caldwell name carried weight here. Thomas Caldwell was known for his discipline and his cruelty. Neighbors described him as a man who believed pain was productivity. His wife, Elizabeth, barely appeared in public. Pale, soft-spoken, almost ghost-like. The kind of woman people forgot until they needed gossip. But in 1849, Thomas Caldwell died suddenly. Brain fever, the county doctor wrote. Others whispered about poison. Whatever the truth, the widow Elizabeth emerged from mourning not broken, but changed. She stopped attending church, refused every offer of help. And most shocking of all, she didn't sell the plantation. She ran it herself. Alone. In Montgomery society, a widow living without male supervision was scandal enough. A widow managing enslaved laborers and property? Unthinkable. But Elizabeth didn't seem to care about appearances. She dismissed nearly half the field hands, sold off equipment, and shut herself inside the house for weeks. Then something impossible happened. The next year, Willow Creek's cotton harvest grew by nearly 30%. 30! And yet, she had fewer workers than ever before. When the county magistrate recorded those numbers, he probably thought it was just an accounting error. But history has a way of marking the unusual, even when no one understands why. Neighbors started talking again. They said Elizabeth never slept, that her lantern glowed through the night. Some claimed they saw strangers on the property, figures moving through the fields long after dark. The minister's wife wrote in a letter, "She carries herself differently now. There's something in her eyes, colder, perhaps. Or clearer." Still, no one confronted her. Maybe they feared her. Maybe they pitied her. Maybe, in a place built on silence, they knew better than to ask too many questions. If you visited Willow Creek then, you'd see beauty masking decay. Ivy strangling the mansion's columns. Shutters flaking like dried skin. And inside, a widow quietly rewriting her place in history, one secret at a time. People would later say that the house felt different after Thomas died. The halls were too still, the air too heavy, like it was holding its breath. Guests spoke of faint sounds, laughter, footsteps, whispers beneath the floorboards, dismissed, of course, as imagination. But history leaves clues for those who listen closely. Elizabeth Caldwell wasn't merely surviving. She was building something. Something beneath their feet. What began as a story of grief was about to become one of the boldest acts of defiance in Southern history, a rebellion waged in silence, hidden under a plantation that preached obedience. And for 2 years, no one knew, until a doctor stepped too close to a bookshelf and the ground beneath Willow Creek began to give up its secrets. Montgomery County, 1850. Among the dusty courthouse shelves, a clerk flipped through stacks of ledgers filled with numbers no one cared about: taxes, crop reports, routine transactions. But one small entry caught his eye. Caldwell Estate, 30% increase in yield. Workforce reduced. No irregularities noted. It was just one line easy to overlook. But that simple arithmetic didn't make sense. How could fewer hands pick more cotton? When officials brought it up briefly at a town meeting, they dismissed it as the widow's good fortune. Others joked that maybe she'd made a deal with the devil. And just like that, the matter was forgotten. But the ledgers never forget. They whisper through time about the things people were too afraid to say out loud. Tax documents show that after Thomas Caldwell's death, Elizabeth sold 15 men to a plantation further south, strong laborers who would have been her main producers. What remained were women, children, and older men. Yet somehow, her profits rose. Shipping manifests from the Montgomery docks confirm it. In one season, her bales of cotton nearly doubled. Steamboats loaded with Willow Creek cotton left for Mobile almost every week, each bearing the initials EC. At first, Neighbors chalked it up to the widow's intelligence. Maybe she'd found a new method, a new overseer. But there was no overseer. No one had seen hired help on the property since Thomas's funeral. Something wasn't adding up. James Harrove, a county tax assessor, decided to find out for himself. In February of 1851, he made an unannounced visit to Willow Creek. His official report? Impeccable. The fields were well kept, the workers polite, the household orderly. Nothing unusual. But in a private letter to his brother, Harrove wrote something different. He said the place felt wrong. The fields were too perfect, he wrote. The laborers moved with a kind of precision I've never seen, as though they were being watched or guided. He also mentioned something else, that the cabins appeared empty, far too few for the plantation's supposed workforce. And when he asked one woman about the discrepancy, she said only, "Mistress takes good care of those who work hard." Her tone, he said, made his blood run cold. A week later, Harrove petitioned to conduct a deeper investigation into the Caldwell estate. That request was denied. 3 months after, he was dead. Heart failure, they said. If you trace those old records today, you'll see it, a pattern of disappearances, denials, and official silence. The kind that forms around something people don't want to find. But behind the numbers and neat handwriting, there's a pulse. The faint heartbeat of something extraordinary, something human. Because for every bale of cotton accounted for in those ledgers, there were lives being unaccounted for beneath them. Hidden names, hidden rooms, hidden mercy. The documents tell one story: efficiency, success, obedience. But read between the lines, and they whisper another. Someone was working those fields who didn't officially exist. And soon, a respected doctor would discover exactly who they were, and what price the widow was paying to keep them safe. December 12, 1850. The winter air over Montgomery was brittle and pale, the kind that made even sound seem hesitant. Dr. Samuel Whitaker rode toward Willow Creek that morning with a leather satchel and a quiet unease he couldn't explain. Elizabeth Caldwell had sent for him, not through a servant, but by handwritten note, sealed and delivered to his office at dawn. "Your discretion," it read, "is required in a matter of delicate health." He'd been the Caldwell family physician for years, attending to Thomas's many accidents and Elizabeth's carefully explained bruises. But since Thomas's death, he'd not been summoned once. Until now. When Whitaker arrived, he was struck by how different the estate looked. The grounds were immaculate, not the weary neglect he'd expected from a lone widow. The fences gleamed, the garden thrived, and though fewer servants moved about, everything seemed to run with quiet precision. Too quiet. Elizabeth greeted him at the door, calm and composed, dressed in morning black as always, yet there was something in her face that unsettled him. Not sorrow, not fear. Control. "I have patients who cannot be seen," she told him flatly. "You'll supply what I request. Nothing more." Whitaker hesitated. "Are they injured?" Her eyes didn't waver. "Yes. But not in ways the county would understand." She handed him a list: bandages, laudanum, splints, disinfectant, the sort of supplies one might need for serious wounds, but far too many for one person. He asked no more questions. In those days, propriety was its own language of silence. Still, something about the request gnawed at him. When he returned days later with the supplies, Elizabeth asked him to wait in her study while she prepared the patients. That's when it happened, the moment the story of Willow Creek shifted from rumor to reality. As he stood near her desk, Whitaker felt a faint draft, a whisper of air, cold and steady, coming from behind a bookcase. He leaned closer, and the wood shifted under his touch. The entire shelf, it turned out, was mounted on a hidden hinge. Behind it, darkness. A narrow staircase leading down into the earth. He stepped closer, heart hammering, when he heard the sound. A muffled voice, then another, and the unmistakable clatter of movement below. Before he could descend, Elizabeth's voice cut through the air behind him. "Doctor," she said quietly, "some doors are not meant to be opened twice." Whitaker turned. Her face was pale but steady, and in her eyes, he saw something fierce, almost pleading. He backed away. She closed the bookcase, locking the secret behind wood and silence. His journal entry that night was brief, but the words still chill the page. I have made a grave error in judgment. God forgive me for what I now know. What did he see? What did she show him in the shadows of that underground passage? We'll never truly know. But what's clear is this: after that day, Whitaker stopped questioning her. He became her quiet accomplice, delivering medicines in unmarked crates, never asking who they were for. And by the time spring came, whispers spread that the widow's house was haunted, not by ghosts, but by the living. For almost a century, the ground beneath Willow Creek kept its silence. The house burned, the land changed hands, and the whispers turned to folklore. Until, in 1967, a team of surveyors stumbled upon something no one was supposed to find. They were assessing the crumbling foundations before the property was sold. When one worker's drill hit hollow stone, the sound echoed oddly, as if it had struck air. By the end of the day, they had uncovered a narrow brick passage, sealed, forgotten, and reaching into the earth. At first, they thought it was an old root cellar. But as they cleared more debris, it kept going and going. Beneath the ruins of the main house, they discovered rooms, 6 of them. Small, low-ceiling spaces, lined with limestone and soot. Primitive sleeping areas made from straw and old blankets. Remnants of tin cookware. Charred wood from a fire that must have burned decades before. And then there was the ventilation system, a series of clay pipes snaking upward into the walls of the mansion above. Ingenious. Almost invisible from the outside. It would have carried smoke, heat, and even whispers away before anyone above ground could detect them. The report from historian Martin Granger described it perfectly. A hidden world, engineered not for storage, but for survival. The most stunning discovery came last, a tunnel that stretched from beneath the cellar to the banks of the Alabama River. Narrow, damp, reinforced with timber and willow roots that masked its entrance. The exit was concealed under the thickest tangle of underbrush, perfectly aligned with a bend in the river where boats could dock unseen. Imagine it, the quiet of night, the chirr of crickets, the faint glimmer of lantern light seeping from beneath the ground. And somewhere inside, the widow moving like a phantom, guiding barefoot souls through the darkness toward freedom. She had built a world under another world, one for deception and one for deliverance. When you stand on that land today, it's hard to picture it. The fields are long gone. The willows have overgrown the banks. But if you close your eyes, you can almost hear the echoes, the scrape of boots on stone, the whispered prayers, the heartbeats of people who had already risked everything. And what's most remarkable, there are no official blueprints.
None.
These tunnels weren't part of the house's original design from 1798, which means every inch of that underground network was carved in secret, by hand. It raises impossible questions. How did Elizabeth manage it? Who helped her? How did she dig beneath a functioning plantation without anyone noticing? The answer might lie with those who stayed after her husband's death, the 38 enslaved men, women, and children who chose not to leave. Records show she sold off the strongest laborers and kept the elders, mothers, and families.
Why?
Because they could be trusted. Maybe they built it together, each shovelful of dirt a quiet rebellion, each plank laid a promise. No one else will live this life again. Those underground chambers weren't just a hiding place, they were a message. A declaration whispered through time. Because beneath the grand facade of the South, beneath its pillars and pride, there were people digging toward freedom, one handful of earth at a time. Not everyone who crossed the widow's path left unchanged. In the autumn of 1850, a girl named Abigail Foster began recording her visits to Willow Creek in a small, leather-bound journal, the kind a young lady might use for poetry or daydreams. She was 18, curious, and, as fate would have it, the daughter of a neighboring plantation owner. Her father believed Elizabeth Caldwell was a lonely woman in need of gentle company. Abigail wasn't so sure. Her first entry about the widow is innocent enough. She speaks little, but observes much. The house feels unnaturally quiet. By her second visit, that quiet began to feel alive. She wrote of rooms that swallowed sound, of footsteps that didn't echo, and of moments when she felt certain she was being watched, not from across the room, but from below. One day, while waiting alone in the parlor, Abigail heard it, faint and unmistakable. Children's laughter. Not distant, not outside, but rising from the floor beneath her feet. She described how it seemed to drift through the boards like a breath. When she mentioned it to Mrs. Caldwell, the widow simply smiled and said, "Old houses play tricks on the ears. You likely heard the kitchen staff's children." But when Abigail stepped outside afterward, there were no children. Not one. From that moment, her diary darkened. She noted how Elizabeth's questions grew strange, not about dresses or books, but about her father's routines, the layout of their home, whether their cellar connected to the riverbank. "I do not think she means me harm," Abigail wrote once, "but I sense that her kindness has a weight behind it, something hidden waiting." Weeks later, the widow invited Abigail for tea, just the two of them. It would be their last meeting. Abigail never described what happened in detail. Only fragments survived, a single trembling paragraph dated March 12, 1851. "I have seen what lies beneath. God help me. Mrs. Caldwell knows that I know. I believe she is deciding whether I can be trusted or whether I too must disappear." That was her final entry. Within a week, Abigail was sent north to Philadelphia for education. She never returned to Alabama. No letters. No explanation. No trace. But her diary survived, hidden in a trunk for generations until it surfaced in the 1950s. And within its fading pages lies something extraordinary, not just fear, but awe. Her last line reads, barely legible through ink and tremor, "She is not what they think she is. Not cruel. Not mad. Something else entirely. I do not know if she serves heaven or hell, only that she serves something greater than herself." If those words sound cryptic, maybe that's because they were meant to be. Abigail couldn't tell anyone what she'd seen, not in a world that would have called her delusional. But her words outlived her, and through them, we glimpse the impossible. A young woman staring into the truth of the South's darkest secret, and finding, beneath its cruelty, a flicker of defiance shaped like hope. In 1960, long after the house had crumbled and the last of its stories had turned to rumor, a team of archivists in Montgomery opened a false drawer inside an antique writing desk once owned by the Caldwell family. Inside lay a small, weathered notebook wrapped in linen and sealed with wax. It contained no diary, no farm records, only initials. 25 of them, each followed by a date and a single word: AR bound. SEA bound. Delivered. At first, historians assumed it was a trade log, maybe shipments or debts. But when linguists cross-referenced the handwriting, it matched letters written by Elizabeth herself. And then someone noticed the pattern. The dates aligned with periods when her plantation's records went silent. No cotton shipments, no local correspondence, nothing. The widow had been moving people, not goods. 25 souls. 25 disappearances, hidden in plain sight under the mask of Southern respectability. If the legend of the Underground Railroad has its saints, Harriet Tubman, William Still, Frederick Douglass, then Elizabeth Caldwell was its ghost. She worked not in the North, but in the heart of the Deep South, where the cost of defiance was death by hanging. How she pulled it off is a masterclass in deception. After her husband's death, she changed everything about the plantation's operation. No more overseers. No external hires. She even converted a portion of her cotton fields into crops that could sustain dozens of hidden mouths: beans, corn, potatoes, food that stored quietly and wouldn't draw suspicion. Her purchases tripled: medical supplies, blankets, preserved goods, and tools she claimed were for the workers' quarters. In truth, they were feeding an underground world. But she couldn't have done it alone. The people she kept after selling off the others, the women, elders, and families, were no random selection. She had chosen them. People she could trust. People who had lost loved ones to slave auctions and would risk everything for the chance to save others. Together, they became the invisible heartbeat of Willow Creek, pretending obedience by day, moving fugitives by night. The tunnel to the river became their lifeline. From there, Elizabeth arranged passage northward through sympathetic riverboat captains, men who ferried more than just cargo. And she recorded every name, not in full, but in code. A promise written in ink that their freedom wasn't forgotten. Later discoveries would confirm even more. Letters exchanged with a northern preacher under the alias E., payment notes made to captains who never appeared in county shipping logs, and even a coded message etched into the border of that same ledger. 25 souls delivered from bondage into light. More will follow. That line was enough to change everything historians thought they knew about resistance in the South. Elizabeth Caldwell had done what almost no one believed possible. She built a station of the Underground Railroad beneath a plantation that symbolized the very system it defied. And somehow, she had hidden it from everyone, neighbors, officials, even her own society. The ledger is more than a document. It's a quiet act of rebellion frozen in paper and ink. Each initial represents a person who walked out of darkness, guided by a woman history never intended to remember. They called her a ghost. But ghosts don't build tunnels. They don't draw maps. And they don't write ledgers that whisper. Across centuries, that freedom was never a northern idea. It was born in the South, beneath the floorboards of a woman's home. By the spring of 1851, the name Elizabeth Caldwell was fading from the social circles of Montgomery. Invitations stopped being sent. Rumors replaced gossip. And then she was gone. No funeral. No obituary. No final record of departure. Just absence. The last official trace came from the county records dated April 3rd. A sale transfer, Willow Creek Plantation, sold to a Mr. Jonathan Bell of New Orleans. The widow's signature appeared at the bottom, bold and unshaken. 10 days later, an arrest warrant was issued in her name. The charges were staggering: theft of property and incitement to insurrection. In 1851 Alabama, those weren't just crimes, they were death sentences. The sheriff's notes on the back of the warrant, found almost a century later, tell the rest of the story. The widow has departed. Let this depart with her. No attempt to pursue her. No posse sent. Nothing. It was as if the county had agreed to pretend she'd never existed. But secrets like hers don't rest easy. Years later, a letter was found in the archives of an abolitionist society in Boston, dated July 1851. It spoke of a Southern widow of means who has rendered extraordinary service to the cause of liberation and now lives among us under a name not her own. The writer never mentioned her by name, but the timing, the phrasing, the widow of means, it could only be Elizabeth. Imagine that journey, slipping away in the dead of night, her carriage rolling toward the river one final time. Perhaps she carried her coded ledger, perhaps only memory. Behind her, the house that had been both prison and sanctuary stood silent, its secret tunnels emptied, its walls hollow as bone. Some believe she fled north through the same network she had once used to save others. Others think she took a steamer bound for England. A few even claim she never left Alabama at all, that she stayed hidden among the free black communities near Mobile, teaching under a false name. No version can be proved. All of them feel possible. What we do know is this: after her disappearance, the ground at Willow Creek refused to stay quiet. In 1852, for enslaved men from neighboring plantations were accused of conspiring with the widow. They were interrogated, tortured, and executed. One transcript survives, the question repeated over and over. Where did she send them? No one ever answered. Within months, the plantation changed hands twice and then burned partially in 1854. The new owners rebuilt, but they couldn't erase the unease. Laborers refused to work the fields at night. Some claimed to hear voices beneath the soil. Others said the riverbank glowed faintly under moonlight, as if the land itself remembered. When archaeologists finally studied the site a century later, they found evidence that supported the rumors: the tunnels, the rooms, the traces of fire and life. But Elizabeth herself remained a ghost. No photograph, no confirmed burial, no descendants. Her story ends where freedom begins, in the space between record and silence. The South would go on pretending she never lived. But in the shadows of every rescued soul, her presence lingered, the woman who outwitted an empire, vanished into legend, and left the world wondering. Was she ever truly gone? For almost a century, the story of Elizabeth Caldwell drifted through Alabama like fog, untouchable, uncertain. But then in 1958, the river gave something back. Construction workers surveying land for a new highway half a mile from the old Caldwell site stumbled on a line of small stones, too deliberate to be natural. At first, they assumed it was an old grave boundary. But when photographed from above, the stones formed something unmistakable, a perfect arrow pointing north. Each stone was carved with a single letter. Together, they spelled one word: follow. Beneath the final stone lay a rusted metal box. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a folded piece of parchment, a map. Not of Montgomery County as it was then, but of the river systems stretching all the way north to Tennessee. The hand-drawn lines were delicate but sure. Hidden waterways, coded markings, and tiny notes at intervals along the banks. Safe, quiet, hold until dark. And in the bottom corner, barely legible beneath the stains of time, a signature, EC. Handwriting analysis later confirmed what local historians already suspected. It matched Elizabeth Caldwell's records from 1850. At the edge of the map ran a string of letters and numbers that baffled researchers for years. It wasn't until 1965 that a linguistics professor from Tuskegee University cracked the code. It used a substitution cipher, biblical references common among abolitionists. The message read, 25 souls delivered from bondage into light. More will follow. The river remembers. The revelation sent shockwaves through Alabama's historical community. It wasn't just proof that Elizabeth had operated a secret network. It showed intention, continuity, a plan that extended beyond Willow Creek. Her story was no longer local folklore. It was part of something vast, a hidden artery of defiance that pulsed beneath the very heart of the slave South. Soon, more clues surfaced. In the attic of a missionary's home in Massachusetts, a letter addressed simply to emerged, dated 1847, 2 years before Thomas Caldwell's death. Continue as you have been, it read. Observe all while appearing to see nothing. The time for more direct action will come. It was signed by Reverend William Parker, a known Northern abolitionist who had lived briefly in Montgomery under the guise of a Bible salesman. That letter changed everything. It meant Elizabeth's rebellion didn't begin with widowhood. It began years earlier, while her husband still lived. And then came the detail that reframed her entire story. Dr. Whitaker's medical journal contained notes from 1848, long before the tunnels, before the harvest surge. He recorded multiple visits to treat Elizabeth for bruises and injuries she claimed were from a fall. Each time, he wrote, I do not believe her. Maybe those beatings didn't just harden her resolve. Maybe they became her motive. When the map and the letter were displayed side by side in the Alabama History Museum, people began calling her something new. Not the ghost of Willow Creek. Not the Mad Widow. They called her the River Widow, the woman who turned her husband's plantation into a river of freedom. And in that name, perhaps for the first time, Elizabeth Caldwell stopped being a mystery. She became something far more dangerous to the world she defied, an idea that survived her. In 2002, long after most historians had written Elizabeth Caldwell's story off as legend, a team of archaeologists returned to the site of Willow Creek. This time, they weren't digging for myths. They were using ground-penetrating radar to map what remained of the tunnels rumored to run beneath the earth. At first, it was routine imaging patterns, collapsed chambers, old root systems. But then the radar revealed something unexpected, a sealed pocket beneath what had once been the widow's personal study. When they broke through, they found a small chamber no larger than a closet, untouched since the 1850s. Inside lay only one object, a gold wedding band, half buried in dust. Etched on the inside of the band were 4 simple words: "Until all are free." It was the kind of inscription that spoke louder than any diary ever could. Tests confirmed the ring dated back to the mid-19th century. No records of another Caldwell bride existed after Elizabeth. The historians didn't need more proof. They knew whose hand had worn it. That discovery reframed her story entirely. For years, Elizabeth had been seen as an enigma, a figure trapped between guilt and grace, myth and morality. But this ring changed everything. It wasn't just jewelry. It was a manifesto small enough to wear on a finger. Think about it. A widow in 1850 Alabama, alone in a house built on slavery, chooses to inscribe those words inside a symbol of marriage, the one object her world told her defined her worth. She turned it into a vow not to a husband, but to humanity, until all are free. Archaeologists also recovered fragments of charred wood near the ring, likely from the fire that consumed the house decades later. Beneath that soot, they found faint etchings on the limestone walls, a tree with 25 notches carved into its trunk. And under it, scrawled in uneven handwriting, "Remember us." Whether those words were left by the fugitives who passed through or by Elizabeth herself, we'll never know. But their message was unmistakable. Remembrance was the truest act of rebellion. When the ring went on display at the Alabama History Museum, visitors were asked to stand quietly before it. And almost everyone did, not because of the gold, but because of what it represented. It wasn't the wealth of a plantation that survived. It was a promise whispered through time that even in a world built on cruelty, compassion can carve its way through stone. Today, historians call Elizabeth Caldwell the most effective rebel the South never recorded. She left no speeches, no confessions, only traces, a ledger, a map, a ring. And yet, those fragments speak volumes. While others fought the system from without, she fought it from within. She weaponized the very structure that enslaved others, the plantation, and turned it into a passage to freedom. Maybe that's why her story still lingers like a spirit over the river. Because the truest revolutions aren't always loud. Sometimes they whisper, through tunnels, through journals, through the glint of a gold ring catching the light after a century underground. The Alabama River still moves the way it always has, slow, deliberate, heavy with memory. On quiet days, when the wind runs through the willows, locals say the air carries whispers. Not words, exactly, but something older, something that hums of unfinished stories. The ground where Willow Creek Plantation once stood is ordinary now. Farmland, fences, cattle. Nothing remains of the grand house or its ivory pillars. Only the stone foundations lie buried, and a historical marker that says almost nothing at all. A single line: site of Willow Creek Plantation, 1798 to 1938. No mention of Elizabeth Caldwell. No mention of tunnels, ledgers, or the lives she saved. Just the silence she left behind. But silence sometimes is a form of survival. Because the truth of Willow Creek was never meant to be shouted. It was meant to be protected, hidden until the world could bear to hear it. In 1969, historian Rebecca Thornton wrote, "The most effective resistance leaves the lightest footprint." And she was right. The absence of records, the missing evidence, the unanswered questions, those are not signs of myth. They're signs of success. Elizabeth Caldwell didn't want to be remembered for defiance. She wanted those she saved to live long enough to forget her. Still, history refuses to let go. Even now, researchers who visit the archives in Montgomery say they feel it, that strange stillness when reading her name. Some report a faint chill, others a sense of being watched. Maybe it's superstition. Maybe it's the weight of a story that was buried too long. And maybe it's her. Not as a ghost in the haunting sense, but as something quieter. The echo of a woman who walked the impossible line between two worlds, the oppressor and the liberator, the lady and the outlaw, the sinner and the savior. She lived in a time that demanded silence, yet she built a rebellion beneath her feet. A network of tunnels where whispers became weapons and courage was measured not in noise, but in endurance. Think of her one last time, standing at the river's edge, lantern in hand, her reflection rippling over dark water. Behind her, a house full of secrets. Ahead, the current carrying 25 souls toward freedom. She knows she can't go with them. Her place is in the shadows, holding the line, keeping the lie alive so others can live the truth. Maybe that's why she vanished without a trace. Not because she was running from the South, but because she was already part of something bigger. Something that didn't belong to any one name. The story of Elizabeth Caldwell isn't just about a woman who defied her world. It's about the hidden hands that shaped history from below, the ones who never made the headlines but made freedom possible. So the next time you hear the Alabama River's slow current, remember her. Not as a ghost, but as a reminder that even in humanity's darkest rooms, someone is always lighting a candle. Because the river remembers. And some stories refuse to drown.